I'd like to welcome you to day 2 of our 2-day event, Women in Skilled Manufacturing Apprenticeships and Careers, an Introduction to Equity and Inclusion. If you joined us yesterday, welcome back. If you're new, then hello, we're happy to have you. The event today is supported by GENDER Industry Partner Contract through the United States Department of Labor. We'd like to extend our thanks to the Department of Labor for its support. My name is Rachel Crowfoot. I'm Senior Communications Manager at JFF Center for, and I'll be your event producer for today. As you settled in, I wanted to go over a couple of logistics for the event. First, the event today is being recorded. I will repeat that. It is being recorded. You'll be receiving the recording for today and also yesterday, early next week. Second, we have a great lineup that I'll go over in a moment, but we also encourage you to share your thoughts, questions, and comments. And you can do that in a few ways. One is to use the chat functionality on WebEx. If the panel isn't already up for you, you should be able to access it on the bottom right of your screen. The second way is through the, we'll share the link for this in just a moment. Great. On Miro, we have 2 big questions for you to weigh in on. The first is, what barriers have you seen to increasing the number of women in the manufacturing industry? Where are there opportunities? The second, this year, we as a country are collectively coping with the COVID-19 essential reexamination of racial how affected the recruitment and retention of women in the manufacturing industry. To give your thoughts, simply double-click on a sticky that's available, or you can drag the sticky from the side. You can resize your notes by dragging on the corners. You can also respond to someone either by putting your sticky clip or by choosing the comment function. As you can see, there's a comment on this one. To move around the board, click on the grid and drag. And you can also zoom in and out using the controls at the bottom or your mouse's scroll function. If you have any questions, we've included instructions up at the top. And we also have chat functionality within Miro, and you can reach out to our staff members and they'll be able to support you. My colleague Mark will share the link to the Miro board in the chat, and you also should have the link in the reminder email you received for the event. Let's get to today's agenda. So first, we'll be hearing from John Ladd, the Administrator, Office of Apprenticeship of the Employment and Training Administration of the U.S. Department of Labor. Then for our first hour together, we'll be looking at how to prepare women to be competitive candidates. We'll learn about implicit bias and application and assessment practices, and then hear about best practices for gender-equitable preparatory and pre-apprenticeship programs. We'll take a short break today at 2 Eastern, and then we'll be back to look at the intersection of race and gender. Here, we'll hear from women of color in manufacturing, and then we'll learn about training and microaggressions and equal opportunity in apprenticeship. We'll wrap up at 4 Eastern time. And now I'd like to turn it over to John Ladd to get us started for today. Thanks for getting us started today, John.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. Hi, everybody. I really do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and I want to thank Chicago Women in Trades, Jobs for the Future, and West Virginia Women Work for hosting this event. I understand Assistant Secretary spoke with you yesterday, so I know he covered a number of important priorities for ETA, so I won't cover that ground as well, but I'm going to cover some additional topics, including some of our investment areas and some other recent work that we've been doing to implement our revised EEO regulation. But first, I do want to say how much we really value all of our partnerships with Chicago Women in Trades, JFF, and others here today. Together, you and your stakeholders play a vital role in stressing the importance of gender, racial inclusion, and equity, and ensuring all workers have an opportunity to succeed. And we really believe apprenticeship provides a great, effective training model that supports the development of these diverse talent pools and provides opportunities for businesses to really expand their workforces. So again, we really appreciate the great work that you all are doing and the work that we're able to do together. Over the past few years, we have some progress in ensuring that apprenticeship opportunities are fully available to everyone. Obviously, more work needs to be done, but I did want to share that since 2015, we've seen women's share of both active and new apprentices increase. Active apprentices has grown from 5.6 to 9.1%. The share of new apprentices has grown from 6.2 to 11.9%. Obviously, well below women's participation rate in the workforce, but we're encouraged to see some positive signs there. And particularly in our investment areas, we're really seeing those investments drive a lot of these increases as well. We've also seen some improvements in racial inclusion. Hispanic and Latino apprentices have increased by nearly 5% for new apprentices, and active apprentices have increased by 3%. Similarly, Black and African American apprentices have increased slightly as well. So again, progress, not enough, not as much as we would like to see, but we're really encouraged to see that things are moving in the right direction, and again, with support from many of you that are participating here today. I do want to highlight and make sure everybody's aware of a number of investments we've made recently that came out at the end of June. So we want to make sure you're aware that in June, we awarded more than $80 million to grants to expand registered apprenticeship in 42 states and territories. So this is similar to what we've been doing each year, where we're providing grants to states to expand their statewide apprenticeship efforts. And we have embedded and included a strong emphasis on diversity and inclusion in each of those grants. So again, that's a strategy you'll see kind of repeated over and over again, where we're trying to embed and make sure that this work is embedded in all of our investment areas. The other big investment we made was around youth apprenticeship. So we awarded over $40 million in youth apprenticeship readiness grants to 14 organizations to increase participation by youth ages 16 to 24 in new or existing registered apprenticeships. So we're really excited about that effort. That's our first major investment in the youth apprenticeship arena. We've been providing some investments. We have some youth intermediaries that we've invested in, but this is actual youth apprenticeship programming grants that are now available and getting up and running. So those are some exciting investments, and of course, we'll have another round of investments in the coming year. In terms of the regulatory front, I think everyone's aware that in 2017 we updated the EEO and apprenticeship regulations, and this new rule did a number of things, but specifically for the first time required anti-harassment training, clarified that sex discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of pregnancy and gender identity. And it also mandated that sponsors conduct outreach and recruitment and provide notice about apprenticeship openings to community-based organizations and other groups that had expertise in reaching those populations. So we really think there are some important developments there and ways that we can help create connections between the sponsors of apprenticeship programs and the agencies and organizations like many that are represented here today that have the expertise in reaching those specific populations. So beyond passing the regulation, there's a lot of work to implement the regulation itself, and we've been very busy there as well. Since 2017, we're working very closely with our state partners, the SAAs, so that they also update their regulations and EEO plans. So that is underway. We've launched a number of technical assistance resources, including EEO posters, anti-harassment training, and a number of other tools and electronic tools that people could take available or make themselves available of. A couple I'll highlight here. We have a partner finder on apprenticeship.gov that allows sponsors to locate pre-apprenticeship programs working in their area. We have a universal outreach tool to assist sponsors in connecting with partners to help with the recruitment. And we're working on a demographic analysis tool that will make the process of developing their affirmative action plans a lot easier and will help with standardizing some of that goal setting. So we're really excited about some of these new tools and resources that are coming online. I'm covering these really quickly here, so I hope you'll attend the panel with Natalie Linton from my staff. She's going to provide a lot more tools or more details about all of these tools and resources. So I think those were the main things I wanted to cover with you all. I really do hope you have a great second day. It seems like there's been great attendance. Really look forward to hearing more of some of the outcomes from these past 2 days. And I'll turn it back to you all, and I hope you have a great rest of the course. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, John. And Trista, I'll pass it on over to you. Good afternoon. Trista, you might be on mute. Oh, Trista, I'm afraid I can't hear you. That's no worries. Trista, we can come back to you in just a moment. Karen, I'll pass it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? All right. I hope everyone's having a great morning or has had a good morning, depending on where you are. I'm on the West Coast, so we are still trying to find the sunshine and the mountains through the smoky haze that we have out this direction. My name's Karen Dove. I'm the Executive Director of ANEW. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to improve people's lives by providing quality training, employment, navigation, and support services leading to family wage careers. We were founded by a desire to recruit more women into non-traditional employment and now work with men and women to break down barriers to family wage careers. ANEW created the Rise Up program, which stands for Respect, Inclusion, Safety, and Equity. This program consists of training, marketing materials, and technical assistance for organizations who wish to recruit and retain a diverse workforce. It started out of a desire to shift the construction industry, which is predominantly white male, to one more inclusive to a diverse workforce. Today, we are going to talk about creating more inclusive and equitable hiring practices, one small part of the HR process. At any time during my presentation, feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat box or utilize the sticky note feature JFF has created for the conference. I will attempt to address questions in the chat box as we go or answer them when I am done speaking. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Karen.
I'm going to keep talking and she'll get the slide, it'll follow. Let's talk about implicit bias in hiring. What is it? What does it look like? Implicit bias is the unconscious attitudes and stereotypes we hold about different groups of people that influence our actions. As humans, we create implicit associations outside of conscious awareness through a lifetime of direct and indirect messages about groups of people. These associations, both positive or negative, can influence our behaviors and actions. Implicit biases are especially intriguing and also especially problematic because they can produce behavior that diverges from a person's avowed or endorsed beliefs or principles. I'm going to say this again. Implicit biases are problematic because they can produce behavior that diverges from a person's values. So what does this mean? I can value equality and opportunity for all, but I can still show bias toward a group that goes against my value. We often make snap decisions based on perceived truth and then spend the rest of our time trying to justify our bias. Most interviewers make a decision about a candidate within 15 minutes, and some before they even start the interview. What does implicit bias look like? We're going to talk a little bit about that. In the hiring process, it can be having an affinity for those candidates who look like us, come from similar backgrounds, areas, or maybe schools. We might ask irrelevant questions trying to elicit the answers that support our initial assumption about the client. We may judge people based on superficial factors that don't have anything to do with how they would perform in the job. Tattoos, piercings, weight, age, even their name, especially if it's the name of your ex, right? Asking for salary history information is another problematic thing to do in the hiring process. Why? Because it creates bias towards disadvantaged groups. We already know women and people of color are making less than white males in the workforce. Knowing that a job applicant is currently underpaid, employers can just offer a little more than their current salary, and they will likely accept the position. Basically, we can continue to pay people less than they are worth. Research shows that the differences between areas with salary history bans, those states that have passed laws, and neighboring counties that can still ask for salary history, generated substantial pay increases for Blacks at an increase in 13% and female at an increase in 8% for those candidates who took the jobs. Let's talk about names for a minute. Leaving names and, for that matter, information that could determine age of a candidate can also create bias in the hiring process. Research shows that Black candidates receive callbacks from resumes 2.5 times more often when they whiten their resume, taking out ethnic names or organizations. An effective way to take bias out of sourcing candidates is to purposely prime your recruitment materials, such as your job descriptions and career pages, to attract the widest possible pool of candidates. There's a number of studies that demonstrate that the impact of bias can begin the second a potential candidate reads the job description. Studies have found that language used in job description, rather than making the job sound appealing to a broad spectrum of candidates, can actually have the adverse effect and put people off applying for jobs. Terms such as salesman, for example, or inadvertently assigning gender to the ideal candidate in the advertisement can deter applicants, as can making the job advertisement all about the company rather than the candidate. This includes, for example, reams of text about what the company requires of the candidate rather than about the skills the ideal candidate has. Bottom line, make sure your job descriptions contain neutral language. If you don't, it can have a negative effect. You can use software like text Textio, Textio. It can help you create objective job descriptions focused on outputs instead of competencies, which in turn allow for a greater pool of people to self-identify with the role. You also need to diversify your sourcing channels. If you are only recruiting in places you associate, you're likely to only get people who look like you. You need to tap into diverse networks, build relationships with people, utilize diverse job boards and associations to assist in recruiting a diverse pool of applicants. You also need to be aware that there are certain bias against accents. Research shows speaking with a non-native accent is linked to career possibilities and progression, and it can influence an interviewer's perception of the speaker's fluency and expectation concerning the non-native speaker's performance abilities. When they do get hired, employees with non-native accents often feel excluded and devalued at work. So it's important to address accent bias in your interview process. Last, and one of my favorite topics in hiring is the cultural fit. Too many organizations look for shared hobbies, opinions, and experience as their measure for cultural fit, instead of looking at the behaviors that ensure success at their company. What is it that you're actually looking for? Cultural fit often becomes an in-group bias, where people who are one of us are favored over people who are different. You should determine the actual traits that make a great hire. Is it the soft skills? Is it the ability to work in an unstructured, stressful environment? Make these the qualities you are looking for, and don't use organizational culture to discriminate. Next slide, please. Oops. Should have been a slide about how to avoid how to avoid bias in hiring process. So let's, now that we've given you some examples, now let's talk about some ways you can avoid bias in the hiring process. Make sure you diversify your recruitment networks. Use a variety of recruitment methods to increase the diversity of a candidate pool. Look beyond those personal networks. Again, if you just recruit from places where you go, you're likely to get people who look and have the same experience as you. We talked about how internal teams tend to refer people that are similar to themselves in terms of race, education, and background, which can contribute to a homogeneous workforce. Instead, make sure you are proactively expanding your candidate pipelines, whether it's through LinkedIn, professional associations, other networks that will allow you to move past first-degree relationships. Second, use accessible and inclusive job descriptions and marketing. Make sure you're preventing bias by removing gender, age, and other restrictive terms from the job advertisement. Don't make the job title and description so prescriptive that only a select few individuals could apply. Make it as inclusive as possible. At the end of the day, you can teach someone how to use a program that your company utilizes, but you can't always teach someone how to be adaptable or be a team player. Words like aggressive or competitive may attract more men, and words like collaborative or friendly may attract more women. Additionally, be mindful of the requirements that you include. Insisting on an education and or experience may be exclusive, limiting your candidates again to a homogeneous group of people. Why are you asking for a bachelor's degree? Is it really necessary for the job? Use neutral descriptions and you'll appeal to a more robust pool of candidates. The more people that could qualify and see themselves successful in the position, the more people will apply. Next, make sure you train all staff on implicit bias. this really has to be there really has to be an understanding that no one is preloaded with inclusive behavior. We are, in fact, biologically hardwired to align with people like us and reject those whom we consider different. I do social justice work. I live and breathe it. I still have bias that I need to work on every single day. Undoing these behaviors requires moving from a fixed mindset, the belief that we're already doing the best we possibly can to build diverse teams, to a mindset of openness and growth where we can deeply understand, challenge, and confront our personal bias. Next, even if you head up your organization's diversity committee, if you're from an underrepresented community, you all have bias that impacts your professional decisions. In 2017, Fortune 500 executive Kristen Pressner gave a brave TED Talk that you can look up on if you Google it, where she admitted to harboring gender bias against women leaders despite identifying as a woman herself. Pressner developed a technique to disrupt bias. Ask yourself if you were to swap out the candidate from an underrepresented background with one of your more typical hires, would you have the same reaction? For example, if a woman of color candidate speaks passionately and you are less inclined to hire her because you think of her as angry, would you use the same word if a white man spoke the same way? That's a great way to make sure you're challenging your bias. Disrupt it. Next, you can use a blind application review. Level the playing field with redacted resumes. As I mentioned earlier, research has shown that candidates with non-white sounding names don't get as many calls for interviews as more traditionally Caucasian names. When certain details such as your name, your hometown, your school, or even your address are excluded, it helps increase diversity. It can be invaluable to review blinded work samples to determine candidates' core competency in a fair, impartial way. Interesting to note, it's now common practice for professional symphonies to hold blind auditions, putting musicians behind curtains so performers are judged solely on the sound and quality of their music. In fact, even after they did blind auditions behind curtains, while it increased their female numbers, they realized they continued to not get the results they were looking for and realized that if women wore high heels as they walked across to get into the chair, they still were biased against. Again, there was bias against them. So it's really important to continue to challenge our assumptions. Standardize or exclude the interview process. Develop clear core competencies before beginning a search to determine the qualities that ideal candidates should offer and compare all prospects against the same list. Ask each candidate the same interview questions to ensure that your assessments are impartial. That stops you from doing what I said at the beginning and just asking questions to try to make somebody fit into your box. Focus the interview questions on factors that directly impact job performance and have the same interview people interview all the candidates so that they can be consistently and fairly assessed. Make sure you're using an interview scorecard and grade each candidate's responses to each question. Then compare candidate score at the end of the interview process. Structured interviews are shown to be more effective at reducing hiring bias than non-structured interviews. If you're just making up questions as you go, you're more likely to have bias in the interview process. Scorecards and skill tests help interviewers rank candidates more objectively. You can use a tool like Gap Jumpers. It's a tool that blocks unconscious bias in the workplace through blind talent auditions. You could also divide up your hiring team to focus on different goals. Have the first person focus on the experience of the candidate, the second on the technical skills, and the third on the culture. The hiring team checks each other for bias during the evaluation process in this methodology, while they're all looking for different things. Rely on test or work product. Just because you went to college does not mean you can do writing and research, right? In order to ensure that a candidate has the skills you need, rely on work product or tests you can administer. This way, you're focused on their skills and not their personality. Set diversity goals. What gets measured gets done. If you don't have goals, things are not going to change. In the city of Seattle, for example, they set a diversity goal for women on construction projects, and they're exceeding a 20% goal on many of their projects. Yet 2 blocks down on other projects with other entities, they have less than 3% women. If you measure it, it gets done. Some examples that you can set of diversity goals: increase in diverse applicants, making it past initial screening. Increase in diverse applicants, making it to the offer stage. Increase in diverse hires, staying on after probation and being at or above 80th percentile for promotions and salary earned after 12 months. So make sure you have specific diversity goals that you're holding yourself accountable to. I just want to again mention some tools you can use, and I get no kickbacks from these companies. Textio, Textio, is a language analysis platform that uncovers gendered phrases and spots biases, allowing companies to write more gender-neutral job descriptions. Unbiased.io is a Google Chrome extension that removes faces and names from LinkedIn profiles to reduce the effects of unconscious bias in recruiting. That's unbias.io. And Gap Jumpers is a blind auditioning tool that allows companies to hire based on performance instead of resume keywords and preconceived assumptions. Thank you so much for your time today. Happy to answer any questions. I'll go back through the chat and try to find any questions that were outstanding. My email, if you want to reach out to me, and I will post this also, is karen@anewaop.org. That is KAREN@ANEWAOP.org. Happy to be here today, and I know you're up for some great speakers to come. Thank you so much.
Vice President of Manufacturing, Engineering, and Training at BSD Industries. Trista, how are you today? Oh, Trista, I'm afraid we still are having a hard time with your audio.
Hello, good morning.
Hi there.
Good afternoon. Okay, great. Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Anything is possible, Trista. Let me see if I can.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I will share it now. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for participating in such a wonderful, wonderful event. I have been on one of the most amazing journeys in my life. In the last 3 months, I've worked with a great group of committee members, all women, to develop the careers for women in manufacturing, and we are focusing on apprenticeships. And just so you know, at BSD Industries, where I am the Vice President of Engineering, Training, and all things related to manufacturing, we have a robotics apprenticeship program and a maintenance apprenticeship program. So I am very excited. I was extremely excited to meet all of the women who are out there across this country doing amazing work to help support women's growth in this particular field through what I consider on-the-job training, especially in apprenticeships. I'm now going to introduce Christina, who is the Executive Director of West Virginia Women's Work. And after that, Ruth Mazzara, the Program Director for Moore Community House Women in Construction, will be speaking on best practices for gender-equitable preparatory and pre-apprenticeship programs. The publication that we've been working on for the last 3 months will further enhance, and I would say be a crescendo of sorts for the types of events that we're having today, because this publication will be used to help expose women all over this country and hopefully beyond to the many possibilities that are out there for women who are interested in having successful careers in manufacturing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christina.
Thank you so much, Trista. And I do not blame you for not taking a shot at that last name. Look at that thing. It's a jumbled mess. But hello, everybody. My name is Christina Surback, and I'm the Executive Director of West Virginia Women Work. Because of not having a lot of time, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about our programming. But over the past 14 years, I've worked to build our pre-apprenticeship programs that are exclusively for women in construction and manufacturing into exemplary models of what works. So please check us out online. You can just Google West Virginia Women Work, or you can Google the name of our pre-apprenticeships, which is Step Up for Women. So today I wanted to share some best practices around recruitment, because I know that a lot of you that are joining us today, you might not have an organization like a new that Karen's with, or my group, Women Work, or CWIT. You might not have a group like that near you that you can recruit trained women from. So today I want to share some strategies that we use over at Women Work, where we collect over 400 applications a year on a shoestring budget, spending very little money. And these are all from women that are just wanting to take a training program, so we're not even paying them. So, you know, I wanted to help companies get their numbers up that high as well by modeling after some of the things that we do in pre-apprenticeship. I like to do this topic with employers as I go around the country doing workshops, because I hear from so many employers, they all say, we actually want to hire women, but none of them are applying. So if that's our baseline, that's where we're gonna work from today. If that's where we're starting from, everyone knows, you've probably heard, you know, that saying, the definition of insanity, which is to keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So whatever we've been doing to recruit workers is not attracting women, meaning we have to do something different. We're not going to go totally rogue. We're just going to tweak some of the things, some of the old methods that we're already using to recruit, because the old methods are not working on their own. Otherwise, women would be applying. So to understand which changes we have to make, we first have to examine why those old methods are not working. So now we're going to get into some psychology type stuff. Disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. But let's take a journey. I only have 10 minutes, so we're just going to go back to the early 90s. There was a trend that kind of took hold back when I was in grade school, and it was aimed at sending this message to young girls. And the message was, you can be anything when you grow up. So that message was driven home with initiatives like Take Your Daughter to Work, and slogans like Girl Power. Here I am, you know, I'm a little kid, all of a sudden here come the Spice Girls, and they're singing about girl power, and one of them even wears like sports clothes. You know, it's a very exciting time to be a young girl. And this meant that my friends and I, we get to start going to work with our moms. And so some of my friends go to veterinary clinics and, you know, a law office. My mother actually worked at a cancer treatment center, and would you believe that even though I got to go to a scientific medical facility as a young girl, they put me in a corner to style wigs all day, I actually still ended up doing hairdressing, even though I went to a medical office. So I never let her live that one down. But what none of us did was sit in the driver's seat of a forklift. None of us were out there climbing utility poles. None of us were, you know, getting to test out running some machines on the shop floor. And then think about, too, the little girls that didn't even get to go to work with anyone. So flash forward now. about 10 years later. And as myself and my friends and those girls that didn't even get to go out with their mothers to the job, we're walking past that hallway, the hallway where the electrical wiring class is, where auto body is, where shop classes are. And if we even acknowledge that that hallway is there, it's really just to kind of automatically tell ourselves in our heads that those classes are for the boys. And so something that is inherently known to girls even still today is that those types of classes aren't for girls. Those classes are for boys. And so by extension, adult women come to have this unconscious understanding of which types of careers are for them and which types are for men. We talked a little bit yesterday about how school-age programming is definitely needed and how it definitely could pay off. Of course, that's 5 to 10 years down the road. But I do want to bring up a couple of examples. One is my own. I did take your daughter to work day, only when my daughter came to work with me, she got to wire a light. She installed tile. And one year I was even lucky enough to take her to Women Build Nations in Seattle with me. And I'm very proud to say that this year she is a second-year electrician apprentice out of IBEW Local 5 in Pittsburgh. Yesterday, we heard from our incredible presenter, Leah Rambo, who talked about having her young nieces and getting them tools and having them come along with her and help her out on projects. And not one, but 3 of her nieces followed in her footsteps as entering into the sheet metal workers, Local 28 in New York. So we know that introducing girls at a young age works. We know that it generates interest that way. But what can we do to recruit the women now? The women like me that already have this unconscious mental block to manufacturing and skilled trades in general. How do we get past this block that is so ingrained that it literally blinds women to advertised opportunities? And so when I say it literally blinds, it means that as women are looking through help wanted ads, if it's just a regular old general help wanted ad, the brain doesn't even acknowledge it. It's not for them. I actually went on to Indeed just this morning and I looked at some ads and I found one here. I'm just going to read it really quickly and kind of give my feedback, if this were me looking for a job. So this said, hiring a full-time CNC machinist assistant. So this position supports all duties for the machine shop, including deburring parts, sawing, and broaching. We'll become familiar with print reading, measuring techniques, and machine tool operation. Now, as me, a person that actually has a better understanding of the manufacturing industry than a layman, that to me is still really intimidating. I don't know what broaching is, deburring, what are these things? Like, what is this ad even talking about? It does do a little bit better at the end where it says, this is a good job for someone just entering the workforce or returning to the workforce with limited experience. But then in my head, I start to picture, but I don't even know what some of these words are. So if I apply, there will be guys that are applying that have done this stuff before. It's not even worth my time. I'm going to be laughed right out of there. So it's not enough to just put ads out there the same old generic way. I'm going to go through three techniques that we can use just really quickly to take some of the old stuff that we're doing and tweak it a little bit to get women's attention and get through that mental block. So the first is going to be to get our ads in front of women. If you're using something like a job service center or a workforce center, call them up. Explicitly tell them that you want them to suggest your opening to women. And you might have to do what we call recruiting recruiters. You might have to go out there and convince people that have their own biases that are helping you to recruit that this is a good career for women. So there might be blockages out there that you're not even aware of, where your ad is just not being put in front of women. Call women's groups and clubs in your area, talk to them about your hiring, hang flyers in places that women frequent, go to child care centers, go to women's gyms, go where the women are and put your information out there. And then forget things like industry job fairs. If you're purposely trying to recruit women, they're not going to be there. Go to places, again, that they'll be. go to the county fair, go to the Christmas parade, pass out Halloween candy with a little brochure or a flyer attached to it. That's, go and meet the women where they are. The second technique, how do you get women to see your ads? The things that you are putting out there. Once you get it in front of them, how do you get past that mental block? One of the things, like this flyer that's up here behind me, is using very intentional and targeted wording. So using the word women really big, really bold, get their attention, get them to look, get a split second of their attention. Say things like, women are encouraged to apply. We hire women. Just be very blunt about it. Say things like, if it's true, say things like, we were voted the best employer by moms, things like that. Pursue those kinds of designations and accolades so that you can use them in your recruiting. And there is nothing wrong with this. Something that I hear a lot when I go into workshops, our companies saying, are we allowed to do that? You're absolutely allowed to do that. You're still hiring men. You're not saying we're only hiring women and not men. And you will still have more men probably than women on staff, even using these techniques. So this is really just complementing your recruitment efforts. Lose the jargon, when you're putting together things that will first get their attention. So you're going to use this big title, women, you're going to grab their attention. But then once they start looking at it, don't get lost in the jargon of what the job is. Say things like we heard on yesterday's call, things that women are interested in. Yesterday we heard women are interested in job stability, they're interested in opportunities to advance, benefits, a career to be proud of. That was something that we heard yesterday. If you offer things like a child care program or any family-friendly policies, put that in your advertisement. And then one of the biggest ones is to add imagery. We heard over and over yesterday, you can't be what you can't see. So use pictures, use real pictures of women doing real work. And then I kind of want to add this thing that I've learned over nearly 20 years now, recruiting women specifically. All of the advertising I do is specifically targeted at women. And I promise you that you could take your entire recruitment budget and switch it all to target women, and men will still apply. So, the psychology of this getting women to apply, it doesn't work in reverse. Men won't see a flyer like this one here of a woman doing manufacturing, doing a machinist job, and think, oh no, oh crap, well I guess manufacturing is not for men anymore. They'll see this flyer and think, I can still apply to that job. So consider actually taking a part of your budget and using it for targeted advertising of women. And I promise you, you will still have the same number of men applying. And my last point is to be really welcoming and encouraging. So if you can get them to see the ad, if you can get them to come and apply, there's still that fear of no one's going to take me serious, or they don't actually want me there, or I'm going to be laughed at, or everybody else is going to know more than me. So pay attention to that pipeline of how you're bringing women in. Who's answering the phones? If you got this ad to work, you put all this money and effort and time into it, and you got it to work, you don't want them to call in and get somebody with a poor attitude on the other line that doesn't understand your goals and what you're trying to do. So make sure you know all the way through who's answering the phones, who's contacting applicants to follow up, who's sitting on those interview panels. Make sure that once you've done all that work, it's going to pay off, and you're going to actually get to the point where you're able to bring women in and hire them. Now, after hiring women comes retention, and that's where my co-presenter Ruth is going to take over and talk about some of the practices that her organization knows are tried and true to get women to stick with it and have long, successful careers. Ruth, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Christina. I really appreciate that, and I just want to say I love the meet women where they are. It seems pretty simple, but it's not. But meeting women where they are is so important on driving this increasing the numbers of women in advanced manufacturing. So thank you again. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Ruth Mazzara, the Program Director for Women in Construction Program at Moore Community House in Biloxi, Mississippi. before I get into what Women in Construction specifically does and that retention strategy and the topic at hand, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of Moore Community House because it leads into what I'll speak about later. Moore Community House is a nonprofit that has focused on comprehensive family services since its founding in 1924. It was founded in response to the growing numbers of mothers working in seafood factories in this specific area of Mississippi. So in the early 1900s, families from Europe came to the area hoping to grow economically in the seafood industry. They didn't have much money. They were escaping unrest in Europe. And so the seafood industry was booming at that time in our area. So while men worked on the boats, the women actually worked in the shrimp and oyster factories. And these men and women also had children. And so while the women worked in the factories, so did their young children, their 3-year-olds, their 5-year-olds. Of course, no child labor laws at that time. So they were working for pennies, essentially, alongside their mothers. So Moore Community House was founded to provide child care to those families working in the seafood industry, allowing mothers to go to work knowing their children were cared for outside of the factory environment. So now bringing it to present day, Moore Community House is still focusing on comprehensive family services through their early Head Start program, as well as the Women in Construction pre-apprenticeship program, where we serve low-income women who are mostly single moms. And so Women in Construction began in 2008 in response to rebuilding efforts after Hurricane Katrina in our area. It was an opportunity for low-income single moms, such as the mothers of children in the early Head Start program, to be trained for these higher wage careers in construction. The Women in Construction program has evolved since then, of course, and now it's responding to the industry needs in our area. And one of the Mississippi Gulf Coast high growth, high demand industries is advanced manufacturing, specifically shipbuilding. So we as a pre-apprenticeship provide skills training for women who are mostly single moms, where they can earn credentials necessary, technical skills to become, can earn credentials and technical skills necessary for being competitive for advanced manufacturing apprenticeships and careers. And so while we're providing those skills and those credentials, we're also providing comprehensive case management and meeting women where they are, as Christina said. And so it's important to know that women do want to work. However, they are generally stuck in low-wage jobs. In Mississippi specifically, women make up about half of our state's workforce, but about 2/3 of the minimum wage jobs. So the majority of women who participate in our program are coming from jobs, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, as housekeepers, nursing assistants, food service, retail, which are great jobs. They're very strenuous and taxing, are considered more traditional for women, but are more closely aligned with the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So that leaves these mothers with young children more in poverty, essentially. So there is a real opportunity to strengthen our workforce by responding to this upskilling women. And so our state has more recently identified this opportunity to upskill the workforce in general and provide some opportunities and pathways and funding to higher wage careers. And that's what Women in Construction has been doing since it began in 2008. And so I think to understand preparing women for careers in advanced manufacturing, it's essential for organizations, whether community-based or for-profit, to recognize and respond to some of the barriers that may prevent women from seeking out, pursuing, or even staying in these advanced manufacturing careers. And so, of course, as I mentioned, Women in Construction case management is so important. We are able to provide supports and resources to mitigate barriers to training and employment, whether that's housing, transportation, domestic violence, mental health, general health. We advocate for the women while showing them how to also advocate for themselves while providing skills training. So one of the barriers, though, that we address, and the most critical in our opinion, is childcare. And so childcare is often a barrier for families, especially single moms. So depending where you live, childcare can cost as much as college tuition. And so when families are considering the cost of childcare and whether to participate in the workforce, often childcare costs outweigh the benefit of working. So while there is federal funding for childcare subsidies, and it's based on income level and family size, in our state, it does not serve all the children who are eligible. So what we have done at Women in Construction is we've developed a strong partnership with our state's Department of Human Services. And so DHS provides funding for our support services, such as childcare assistance. And so we use this funding to pay for childcare for the women enrolled in training, also while they are applying for apprenticeships or jobs, also while they are getting established in their new opportunities. And so this childcare assistance has proven vital for women in our area to participate in training, seek employment, gain employment, retain their employment opportunities, ultimately moving their families into economic self-sufficiency. And so I recognize that we are a community-based organization and are able to seek out those types of partnerships and be flexible in our program designs. I also recognize our model is not easy to come by. It depends on your state and available funding. However, organizations can still look at what effect childcare barriers have on their workforce or trainees. And so we, as an organization, looked at that barrier and sought out ways in which to mitigate it. And we were just extremely fortunate that our State Department of Human Services was able to provide that funding. There are some other ways that we have responded outside of the state funding. We've been able to be really creative in our class designs. So we have held night classes. This is when moms might have more support from family or friends for childcare, or night classes for moms who could not afford to quit their low-wage jobs they held during the day. We have held classes based strictly around local public school hours, so moms could come to class after dropping children off, and then they would be released from class in order to pick up their children. We have partnered with childcare centers in our area who provide non-traditional hours, though I will say in our area, it's extremely scarce. And by scarce, I mean there is one 24-hour center along the entire Mississippi Gulf Coast, and then there is one other center that provides care until midnight. Neither of these centers are near our shipyards. However, they are very close to our 24-hour casinos, which provide many low-wage jobs for women. So we have also, as an organization, reviewed our program attendance policy to make sure it still makes sense for parents. So while we recognize that it's important to have a strict attendance policy to ensure those expectations are set, we also know that with families in general, sometimes kids get sick, childcare providers close, and things happen out of the parent's control. For example, right now, I'm on the coast in Mississippi, and we were threatened with a hurricane, and schools are closed. If my mother-in-law hadn't stepped in, I would have screaming kids in the background potentially right now. So there are real issues that arise that are really out of the parent's control. And so another way is we've been able to provide opportunities for graduates of our program to network with each other. They provide a support network, a sisterhood as they enter into these opportunities. They even provide childcare for each other sometimes. And so I know that was sort of a long list of what we have been able to do with the type of program that we have, and it may not be feasible for other organizations. And so my challenge is, if I could have one action item for you, is to kind of review what your organization is currently doing and also see if there is something that you could do to respond to these childcare barriers that affect a lot of women. Unfortunately, it's not a one-size-fits-all. At the end of the day, attention to childcare as part of your culture could improve retention. It reduces absenteeism. It attracts women to your organization as a recruitment tool. And so if you start looking at options, a few ideas might be to look if your organization could provide childcare benefits in your benefit package. There are companies that do that. Are there childcare centers in your area that provide care for non-traditional hours? If so, could you partner with them? Could you even partner with them in a way to provide discounts to parents? And could you cover that discounted cost? Child care centers themselves generally don't produce a lot of income. And so even supporting that child care center through providing subsidies for your employees could really help. Could you look at having family-friendly shifts? You know, these are generally working parents, women and men. Family-friendly shifts could be really important for that retention. Could your attendance policy benefit from tweaking in response to working parents? So looking at your attendance policy, are there ways in which even a working parent can maintain their jobs without getting fired for missing because their kid got sick? So in closing, again, my ask is just for your organization to see what it can do to respond to childcare barriers that many low-income families are often faced with. And these low-income families are often headed by single moms. And so hopefully in creating a culture where you are attentive to childcare barriers and also create a culture where it isn't shameful to have children, it can be really important to, again, in your recruitment and also your long-term retention. So thank you very much. I really appreciate being asked to participate in this, and I thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina and Ruth. Trista, would you like to carry us into the break?
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for your participation so far. I must say I'm impressed. These events have been well attended for both days, and so this is exciting. I'm really impressed with all of you all's stories about how you've helped catapult women in this industry. When I started out in robotics, I was in engineering and in manufacturing. I was a young woman and I felt like I was standing alone. And after, going through what I've endured, I would say, because it is a hardship at points in our careers, of evolving and growing and learning and now collaborating. This is just very exciting. I cannot wait to see how we're going to be able to help empower women as a collaborative. I think this is great, and I look forward to the second half of today's event.
Thanks so much, everyone. And while we're going on break, I just wanted to let people know about some resources that are coming up from JFF and Chicago Women in Trades. On jff.org/resources, you'll find our new Diversifying Apprenticeship, Acknowledging Unconscious Bias to Improve Employee Access, written by our Jessica Tolia. This JFF report has recommendations on how to overcome opportunities accessible to everyone in the pipeline. Also, we have coming up from Chicago Women in Trades, a women's guide to manufacturing careers. This upcoming publication will help women who are interested in pursuing manufacturing careers understand others' experiences, learn about the industry, and determine the next steps of their journeys. So again, thanks so much for joining, everyone. We'll be taking a quick break, so stretch your legs. We'll be back at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for rejoining us for part 2 of today's Virtual Institute. Also, I'd like to thank all of our previous speakers today. My name is Lakeisha Hines. I am Program Coordinator for West Virginia Women Work Advanced Manufacturing Program. I am also proud to say that I am a 2017 graduate of the West Virginia Women Work Advanced Construction Pre-Apprentice pre-apprenticeship program, which not only introduced me to the world of trade, but also gave me the passion to want to help other women succeed in the trades. We hope today's discussion is not only informative, but also starts to bridge the gap of equality and inclusion between not only the employer and women of color, but also just women in general. Today, we will start off with key points of addressing intersection of race and gender provided by Constance Thompson, Senior Director of Women's Engagement with the Manufacturing Institute. Also to be highlighted will be the experiences of women in color from a diverse panel of women representing different sectors in manufacturing industry. This informative discussion will bring together the experiences of both the tradeswomen and the company representatives with panel members Carla Trotman, President and CEO of Electrosoft Incorporated, Danita Dixon, Production Supervisor for First Quality Retail Services, Melinda DeJesus, Welder and President of Competitive Doors, and also we'll be joined by Constance Thompson on our panel as well, the Senior Director of Women's Engagement at the Manufacturing Institute. After our panel discussion, we'll be pleased to be hearing from Dr. Kimberly Harden, President of Harden Consulting, on the importance of bystander training and understanding microaggressions in the industry. We're also pleased to be joined by Natalie Linton from the U.S. Department of Labor on the equal opportunity of apprenticeship. And lastly, to close us out today, we will be joined by Lark Jackson, Program Manager, National Center of Women's Equality in Apprenticeship and Employment from Chicago Women in Trades. So to start off part 2 of section 2 today, we'll be addressing the intersection of race and gender. Please let me reintroduce Senior Director of Women's Engagement with Manufacturing Institute, Constance Thompson.
Lakeisha, and a big thanks to each of you, JSS, West Virginia Women Work, and the Chicago Women in Trades organization. As stated, my name is Constance Thompson, and I have the pleasure of serving as Senior Director of Women's Engagement with the Manufacturing Institute. The Manufacturing Institute is the workforce and education arm of the National Association of Manufacturers. We have over 14,000 manufacturing members at the National Association of Manufacturers, and we serve as the voice. The NAM serves as the voice of manufacturers across our nation. And speaking of our nation, today's conversation was delighted to be invited to join this conversation because I view it as not only vital, but timely, and mostly due to the fact that when you look at the demographics, women of color are the future of our manufacturing workforce. These young women that you see that are interested in STEM and interested in changing the world, manufacturing, current manufacturing, not the stereotypical manufacturing, is the future of our nation. Currently, as you see, women are on the front lines of manufacturers in addressing the COVID-19 crisis. And manufacturing is at the helm of addressing many of our nation's economic woes. I believe that now, more than ever, maybe since World War II, when women step up, our Rosie stepped up. And a fact there is that of those 7 million women that are counted as Rosies, over 600,000 of them were women of color. They worked in manufacturing plants. They worked in making munitions. They worked making textiles. They worked in government offices, bringing this nation back from our helm of economic woes. Now, what happened after that, we can talk about that another time, but we want to acknowledge the fact that women of color have been at the front lines of addressing many of our manufacturing concerns in this nation. Yet, and I think this is the good news, there remains a need for talented and skilled individuals in manufacturing. There is a skills gap still, even amongst what we're going through now as a nation. There's still a need for manufacturing workers, and being able to attract, develop, and retain women of color in the trades is a critical part of our nation coming back and addressing some of our COVID-19 needs. The other aspect of today that I believe that we should all be encouraged about is that we are talking about these critical issues. Hearing the experiences of women of color who have entered into the manufacturing workforce, who are newly entering the manufacturing workforce, and those who have left is critically important to understanding what we need to do to retain, develop, and attract the next generation of individuals. Accountability around addressing these microaggressions that happen is a critical part of what we've learned is important to retaining and developing not only women of color, but women across the board in manufacturing. And last but not least, becoming an ally and supporting those women of color in manufacturing through what many of us go through in the profession is critically important. So I applaud JSF, I applaud West Virginia Women at Work, I applaud the Chicago Women in Trades for having this vital and critical conversation about what we need to do. And I will say this, some stats, that's how we deal, that's how we do. So last year at this time, women in manufacturing represent roughly 29% of the manufacturing workforce. In July of 2020, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it was 28.5% of women in manufacturing. A lot of that was due to the economic woes, but a lot of that was due to the fact that we need a different level of skills. We need a different level of agility. We need a different level of a mindset about that can-do spirit to being able to be in manufacturing, and addressing and hearing the stories of women of color, women where we enter, addressing those microaggressions and having accountability within organizations around addressing those microaggressions, and supporting individuals as allies is a critical part of that. And in closing, what I'd like to share is for those women of color who are part of this discussion and are allies, know that you are important, that you are needed, you are necessary, and you are the future of manufacturing. I'll turn it back over to you, Lakeisha.
Thank you so much, Constance, for your perspective on the importance of race and gender in the field. There is no better way to get an understanding of an issue than to hear directly from the people impacted by it. To discuss the experiences of women in color, please welcome our panel, Carla Trotman, Danita Dixon, Melinda DeJesus, and Constance Thompson. To kick off our discussion, I would first like to ask Danita, how can we provide more placement and retention assistance to women of color in manufacturing? Danita, I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Hello. Thank you for having me. I think that is a double answer, because when you look at it, based on my own experience in manufacturing, you have to start out with wanting, a person has to want placement, a person has to want to develop themselves. And with that, you have to get educated, where it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to college, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to a trade school, but, you know, even with the apprenticeship programs, I mean, look into your own organizations and see what they have and reach out to them. You have to want, if a person in manufacturing of color wants to move up, they have to own that. But they also have to get their own exposure to that. This is doing something. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Also, with me, I did go to school. I was able to take advantage of our tuition reimbursement program and work my way up in the organization. And I saw myself as a person who can share that experience. Because in an organization, as women of color, we want to move up, we want to succeed, but we also have to take advantage of what's in front of us and not necessarily looking at what's behind us. If we take that mindset, as Constance was saying, I love that, we have to change that mindset and really, really progress with that. Also, you not wait on someone to develop you for what you want. You have to have your career path. You have to have an idea. Some people may enjoy just maybe doing what they do, say in robotics, or just putting things up in a box. But if that individual wants more, they have to show that they want more. and actually reach out. There's mentors there. There's people in the field that will help, and different organizations that will help. And also volunteer outside your organization to get that leadership skill. And also bring it back to your organization. Say, hey, I'm ready. I can make this stance in doing something else. And getting that exposure will actually go a long way. And that is definitely from experience. As far as employers are concerned, I think overall some employers have to come outside of their comfort zone and be willing to have a different outlook in different residential areas to capture those different groups of women of color that want to learn things and want to come into different organizations, but they just don't know how. So we as an organization and women of color, we have to reach those individuals. They're scared, but they want to know how. And if, having that experience, and I come across women all the time that are fascinated about the things that I do, and I just share my experience and I try to guide them. So with that, all I can say is you have to see the benefits of what you want to do, reach out to your organization, and just start from there. Go ahead.
Thank you. Next, I would like to ask Constance, how do we establish partnerships focused more on gender and race inclusion in manufacturing?
That's an interesting question, just because of the depth of what you're really asking. And at the core of it is readying corporations to have these discussions, because that's really where the rubber hits the road in the apprenticeship programs and the programs that aim to retain women. And what I mean by that is within organizations, so when we talk about microaggressions, what's the accountability around identifying microaggressions and addressing them in a way that doesn't seem oriented on either side, but is solution oriented. So I think that internal partnership with HR and the business unit around how you identify microaggressions, what happens in recruiting when you partner with trades groups, that's a big part of it. So I normally, when people ask me this question, I like to break it down into like individual, interpersonal, group, and organizational level. So I'll give you one thing for each area in creating partnerships. For individuals, it is critically important that we encourage women of color to become part of organizations that represent our interest in manufacturing. And those are organizations that are local, they are regional. So there's quite a few of those, but it's important that we do that. On an interpersonal level, it is critically important that we have not only sponsors and mentors. So that partnership is really an individual reaching out to someone who may not look like them, who may not have had when and where we enter that journey. So that's the partnership there. On a group level, I'll mention two of these things. Groups like JFF, West Virginia Women at Work, and Chicago Women in Trades are incredibly important and vital to the retention and engagement of these women. So I encourage, since this is who we're talking to today, JFF, West Virginia Women at Work, and Chicago Women in Trades to work together on a coalition that has a mentoring and sponsoring program. There you go. The next is to partner with employee resource groups within these companies and organizations that are responsible for helping to retain and recruit women of color. And last but not least, I mentioned it before, the accountability around how an organization is ready to welcome women of color, to develop women of color, as well as address some of the issues that come up, start with readying the culture. So those are the partnerships, and I know that's not a traditional response, but those are more solutions, bottom line oriented responses to increasing the engagement and representation of women of color in manufacturing, because our issue is culture. Our issue as an industry is culture. I'll say that a million times. So things get at addressing the culture.
Thank you. We are very pleased to have Carla Troutman here, who is actually owner of her own manufacturing company, very rare to see an African-American woman be the owner of a manufacturing company. So I would like to ask you, Carla, are there any ways that you are treated differently as a Black woman owning a manufacturing company versus your white male counterparts?
Well, I would say if people don't do their research ahead of time, I'm definitely not what they expect walking through the door. But I mean, it's like they say, you know, act like you've been somewhere, act like you belong there. I don't treat it any other way. I walk into any situation, any business situation. My company is actually a family company. I purchased it from my father. We are in our 34th year. So I grew up in this industry. However, I did have a corporate career prior to purchasing this business. And any person of color who's worked in any corporate setting or any business setting knows that there's always going to be, as Constance mentioned, microaggressions and even overt forms of racism that you experience. But our company having its own legacy within the industry, the work speaks for itself. So thankfully, it's not been an issue to date.
Okay. I would like to also ask you, how can we improve the visibility of women of color in manufacturing?
So those of us who are working in manufacturing at this time do what, like I'm doing right now. You get out and you speak about it. I believe, and we've always believed at our company, that if you can see it, you can be it. So we're not shy about opening our doors. I've joined multiple organizations within manufacturing and have taken leadership roles so that I've invited myself to the table to make people aware of the fact that, yes, women of color do exist in management roles, in manufacturing roles. I grew up soldering. I grew up doing electronics manufacturing work. I know what it looks like. I've seen people of color. In fact, most of the people that work for me are of color. I like to encourage people, especially young people, to think about going into manufacturing, but not just working in it, but owning the company. Because people of color are more inclined to hire more people of color. So that contributes to the pipeline.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Danita, what are some challenges for engaging women of color in manufacturing?
I would say some of the challenges is taking yourself out of your own comfort zone and being able to take that leap of faith into something that you want to do, something that you're passionate about doing, but you're scared to take that jump because you're comfortable doing what you're doing. So that can be a challenge not only to yourself, but if you're trying to get into another position as well. Because if you don't see yourself moving in an upward direction, how can you expect someone else to see it?
Constance, would you like to add to that question, please?
I'm nodding my head because working with women of color in manufacturing, that's what I hear. There's a fear in stepping out. There's a fear of retaliation if they say something or step out to say, you know what, I have to not only be here for myself, but for others, and I have to take that risk. I'm not going to move forward if I take that risk. So I think organizations working harder to create a climate. And I call it a psychologically safe environment. If any of you are interested in this, is a concept called psychological safety. Dr. Amy Edmondson kind of coined it and did the research around it. And it's when someone is able to bring their full self to the table, but also say, I made a mistake, I'm curious about this and need help, and I want to learn more, which are barriers that I see and that the research points to in women of color many times in organizations. So I just, when Danita was talking, I'm just nodding my head like, oh my gosh, that story seems unfortunately so familiar.
Great. Carla, since you said that a lot of your workforce is people of color, how were you able to increase your workforce of people of color?
Well, just like anyone, we do a lot of referrals. We ask the people who work for us if they know anyone. And in many times we're like, yeah, I have a sister, a cousin, a brother, uncle, husband. And so we have some people here that are actually family members. But we make purposeful search. We go to churches. We go to churches of different faiths and different cultures and different backgrounds to seek out people. We go directly to the source of the schools. We ask people if they know any other companies, if they know of anybody in their company that they've laid off looking for work as well. So we love having a diverse workforce. It does bring a lot of different ideas to the table, especially on my management team. We're all very different, and we all think of things from a different perspective. And we have an open environment where I want people to tell me if I'm wrong. I want you to tell me if you have a different perspective or if you see something differently. And I think that allows us to continue to consistently look for people who are different than us to come and work for us.
Bravo, Carla. Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you.
What I see as program coordinator for West Virginia Women Work program that I run is just that we have some women who are just having a hard time getting over the leap of just getting the self-confidence, not that they can't do the job, but they just don't have the self-confidence to actually enter into the manufacturing workforce. Do you have any type of advice for women who maybe are interested but just don't know how to cross over or how to leave what they've been doing for years before they get into this manufacturing shift in occupation?
Are you asking me?
Yes, you can start off.
Okay, I'll start you off. I think with anything new, it can be very difficult to get started, obviously. One thing I encourage people to do is just talk to someone in that career that they're interested in. I know that we bring people in who are interested in manufacturing and don't quite know what it is to just come and take a look at what we do. I started doing more video work for our business so that people can see what manufacturing is in our environment. I see that some people are asking me what I do on the chat. So my company is Electronics Contract Manufacturing. That means that companies come to us with their drawings of their electronics, and we build those electronics for them. We buy the components. All of my staff are experienced assemblers and technicians. So when a lot of people say, oh, you work in manufacturing, I mean, I think they're thinking of me with like a welder's hat on and sparks flying in the background all day. And it's not like that. And manufacturing has so many different forms. It's actually very quiet. I think the loudest thing is compressed air in my workshop. And I've told people, other manufacturers, I'm like, manufacturing needs a sexy makeover, because when you think about it, it's not what it used to be. And so I would, yeah, thank you. I would encourage anybody who's interested, to just talk and ask companies, like, what do you do? The conversation alone will make you get a lot more comfortable. And look online. You can look on my website. I think Mark put it in the chat, but it's electrosoftinc.com. And I put a 3D model. I had 360-degree photography done in our facility. And you can see it's a warehouse with like lighting and benches everywhere, because we move based on whatever work we're doing. And different workspaces are just different. It depends on what you like to do. We love women in our field because of the type work, the discrete components and the cable. And, women have a very delicate touch. I'm sure there's some men with delicate touch, but most of the time it's women who are able to solder and get into do that component work. And if you find something that you really like to do, I would encourage you to just delve in and do some more research and have those one-on-one conversations.
If I may, Lakeisha, the whole image of manufacturing, I can't talk about that enough. And something we are doing at the Manufacturing Institute is that we kind of help the nation host Manufacturing Day, which is on October 2nd. And if you go to the website creatorswanted.org altogether, it has a toolkit on how to talk to young ladies and women about manufacturing, about modern manufacturing, what it looks like. Also on that website, there will be a series of free virtual tours manufacturing facilities across the U.S. And I think that image piece that Carla mentioned, it is so critical. We are suffering because of the image of manufacturing. It's actually more modern than not. The other piece that I wanted to mention is that we have a program called the Step Ahead Awards. Every year, we award 130 women with a recognition of being leaders in manufacturing. A part of being awarded that is that you have to do outreach to other women, not just young girls, but other women, to encourage them to stay and be retained in manufacturing. And you can go to the manufacturinginstitute.org/women to learn more about that program. We have nominations open there. But I can't say enough how important it is to have an arsenal of women, whether you're a company, an association or organization, who are willing to go out with talking points you provide them with to talk about manufacturing, what it is, what it isn't, how great it is. This has worked greatly for women who are over a certain age, I'll just say, coming into manufacturing, because there are roles there for them as well, but also for women of color to see other women of color in manufacturing.
Yes, I'm glad you addressed that. We have some people in our chat room that were wondering about maybe the age range from like 35 to 50 and how they fit into that, and what type of jobs are more attractive to the older women in manufacturing. So also I wanted to ask, how can we implement more women of color behind the scenes actually doing the hiring process to get more women of color in? Danita, would you like to answer?
Well, I would say having someone from your actual organization doesn't have to be someone in the recruitment area, but someone just to come in and speak to someone who wants to get hired there, and just share an experience. Because your experience can go a long way with someone who wants to come to your company. And if they just see, hiring person, they're going to be reluctant really to want to speak out or want to engage in that real hard conversation about what it is to be working in the manufacturing field. But coming from someone who actually is hands-on doing the job, I think that goes a longer way than just someone, hiring someone to come into the company.
If I may add to that, this is where these employee resource groups come in handy within larger organizations, because part of their accountability is to recruit people, and they're not in traditional HR roles. The other is to equip individuals to have the conversation with HR. Sometimes HR is not sure how to address. We have a diversity recruiting program. We have a commitment to diversity, inclusion, and recruiting people. Unfortunately, they don't know how to have those conversations. And sometimes it's important to work with them to actually have those candid conversations with them as well. So those are two things that I've noticed that really helps in recruiting individuals to organizations.
My company, when we do hiring, we do panel interviews. We no longer just take one person's input. When we're interviewing a candidate, we have everyone sitting together, and like I said, we are a multiracial, different ages, at least 4 people in the room when we speak to candidates, to make sure that we're all, because we all take in information differently, so that everyone has a fair shot at that position, and that we are all giving our input and seeing where we can potentially see this particular candidate.
Isn't this where allies come into? I think sometimes we exclude people that don't look like or have when and where we enter our journeys. And sometimes having allies helps to address the recruitment issue in regards to getting people into organizations. Particularly in this climate, a lot of discussions around, well, I don't think I can relate because I'm not a woman of color. And it's like, but you are a woman, and you are someone in a field or in a role that's traditionally underrepresented. You're an ally. Sometimes those conversations are necessary to help increase the representation of individuals in the organization. So I think this is where sometimes allies come in as well.
All right. think we're going to wrap up our panel for now, but I do want to thank all of our panelists, Danita, Carla, and Constance. Thank you so much for your input on our panel. Next up, we will have our expertise on bystander training and understanding microaggressions. And I would like to introduce Dr. Kimberly Harden, President of Harden Consulting. Yes.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn on my video just briefly because I'm in Seattle and we're having a lot of fires and the smoke, and so we're having kind of glitchy internet service. So I just wanted you all to see me so you can see who I am, and then I'm going to turn my camera back off and give the presentation. Rachel, are we queued up? Rachel. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, Kimberly. Yep, they're loading up just now.
Okay, great. And also, I just wanted to introduce my assistant, Jalen. Jalen's going to be moderating the chat for me. And every now and then, I will ask her if there's comments or comments that I need to address. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I am founder and CEO of Harden Consulting Group, which is a diversity inclusion strategy company here in Seattle. I've been doing a lot of work with the new for the past few years, and I know that Karen Dove was one of your panelists earlier today. So that's just great because I love ANU, and I actually started a scholarship with ANU a few months ago to honor my parents who were not in manufacturing. They were steel workers, and that's how they met. They actually met on the job and fell in love and had me, and so that was my small way of honoring them. So the scholarship is specifically for people of color who are entering the trade. I'm also a professor of communication at Seattle University, and so I teach communication and research, and so everything that I'm going to be talking about will be steeped in communication as far as a little bit of research, a little bit of storytelling. Next slide, please. So when we get started, I have a question for you all. There are 4 birds sitting in a tree. If you take a slingshot and shoot one of them, how many are left? So either unmute yourself or go ahead and type it in the chat. Okay, so I'm gonna have fun with some of you all. The ones who said if you take a slingshot and you shoot one of them and you still have 4, unmute yourself and explain why you would think you still have 4. All 4 because I'm a bad shot. Well, touche. Any other explanation besides being a bad shot? Okay, I love that you all are participating, so thank you in that. The answer is 0, because if you shoot one bird, the others are going to fly away, right? So if you reflect on this for a moment, birds and human situations are actually comparable, because if you do harm to one employee, the other employee is going to find a reason to leave. Next slide, please. So the learning objectives for today, we're going to talk about why women are untapped talent in the manufacturing industry. I'm also going to tell you a little bit about the industry-specific bias and discrimination. And we're going to talk about how to intervene in an appropriate manner. And this is where bystander intervention comes in. And so, again, this presentation has some data. I try not to overwhelm you, but I'm a communications professor. I like data. What can I say? Next slide, please. Although women make up nearly half, approximately 47% of the total U.S. labor force, women are underrepresented in nearly every single manufacturing sector in the United States. The total number of persons employed in the manufacturing industry as a whole is 15,741. And across the total U.S. labor force, women earn more than half of the associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, and master's degrees. And so it's interesting to me that there are plenty of women, plenty of qualified women who are capable of doing the job, but the question is, why aren't they specifically in manufacturing? So if you look at this data, it actually breaks down. This is the most recent data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics that breaks down not only gender, but also race. Next slide, please. You know, women really got into manufacturing in the 1960s. And if you look at this chart, things have not progressed at all. Very, very little, only 0.4% from 1970 to 2016. 0.4%. That was actually very alarming to me, that it has barely moved. The needle has not moved much. And so it made me wonder what was happening. Why is this such a stagnant industry? Next slide, please. And of course, there's several reasons why, you know, the industry is stagnant, but the three main reasons that I identified are bias, microaggressions, and discrimination. And so I wanted to just give my definition that I use regarding bias, microaggressions, and discrimination. So bias is actually just prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or a group compared with another. And it's usually done in a way that's unfair to a particular group. Microaggressions are brief exchanges that send denigrating messages to specific individuals because of their group membership. And the EEOC simply defines discrimination as to treat a person differently or less favorably for some reason. Next slide, please. You know, we hear a lot of talk about bias, and there's actually 12 different types of biases, but I'm focusing specifically on the three main types that shows up a lot in the workplace. The first one is explicit bias, which is very overt and deliberate. It's activated volitionally, and it's just open prejudice. So I see Christina on the screen. I would just say, you know what? I don't like people named Christina that spells their name with a K. Right? That is explicit bias. Implicit bias would be more covert or unconscious bias. It's activated unintentionally, and it's very cryptic. So I would say something to the effect of, you know, playing with Christina again. I would say, you know, I really like the name Christina, but it's really confusing because traditionally it's spelled with a CH and not a K, and you're just trying to be different, and that just causes a lot of confusion on how to spell your name, right? So that's implicit bias. And then confirmation bias is automatic, it's unintentional, and it's resistant to change. So I would say something to the effect of, well, you know, in my experience, people named Christina often show up late. And the one time you show up late, I would say, see, her name is Christina. I knew she was going to show up late because that's what people named Christina, that's what they do, right? So that is confirmation bias. You would take one simple situation and use that as a confirmation. So next slide, please. The same thing actually happens in the workplace. And so, for example, a person with explicit bias would say, women shouldn't be allowed to work. This happens all the time. Women shouldn't be allowed to work. That's the very explicit bias. With implicit bias, someone would say, I'm not against women working outside of the home, but I'm concerned that they may neglect their children. And then a person with confirmation bias would say, you know, she was out 3 days this week to, take care of her sick child. She's neglecting her job. We're left holding the bag. We're doing extra work. And that's why women should be stay-at-home moms. Right? So that is confirmation bias. Next slide, please. We're all very aware that bias shows itself as barriers to opportunities, and it shows itself in a myriad of ways, such as healthcare quality and impact, workforce planning, higher education, integration and collaboration, human and health services, and of course, criminal justice. And the subtle assumptions we make about people can have lasting effects, not only on the person, but also on our organizations in terms of who we're hiring, who's being promoted, and who we're putting in leadership roles, but it also has a serious effect on who's even applying for these positions. We must understand and confront our own bias in order to address the impact of implicit bias and expose the ways that the phenomenon creates and reinforces barriers to opportunity. Next slide, please. So specifically as it relates to workforce planning and development, some scholars, such as William Tierney and Margaret Sally, suggest that the lack of workplace diversity is the result of problematic recruiting and hiring, not the dearth of qualified candidates. And that's exactly what a few of the panelists from the last session talked about. And this phenomenon is across industries, including manufacturing. Organizations cannot simply point to the low number of candidates as a simple causal explanation for the lack of diversity. The recruitment process itself is fraught with difficulties, and psychologists assert that bias is so pervasive and so embedded in American culture that most organizational leaders are completely unaware that their recruitment and hiring selection procedures are inherently and explicitly racist. And so what I do as a consultant is I actually work with leaders and HR to actually review their job descriptions because the way job descriptions are written can be biased and cut out a large population of people from applying for those positions. Next slide, please. Another issue with bias is integration and collaboration. And there's some research that argues that people are unsuccessful in the workplace because they find their position uninviting, unaccommodating, and unappealing. So what does that really mean? In a nutshell, it means that despite diversity and inclusion initiatives, the element of equity and belonging is still missing. Women, people of color, millennials, and members of the LGBT+ community aren't receiving the resources that they need to become fully integrated team members. And this is due to systemic oppression and the chilly climate of that. So I'm going to pause here and ask Jalen if there are any questions or comments in the chat.
There's one question from Mary. She asks, oh, it just moved, sorry. What about wraparound services for childcare, transportation, housing? These are real barriers for women.
You're jumping ahead of me, Mary. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit.
Okay, are you ready for the next question?
Yes.
Okay, so Carolyn asks, one of the panelists mentioned there are resources and talking points to help us discuss manufacturing with women. Where on their website might I find these resources? She also mentioned they have virtual tours, but I cannot find that either.
I am going to defer to the panel and to Rachel on that.
Okay, that's all the questions for now.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So as we all know, discrimination is the unfair and prejudicial treatment of people and groups based on characteristics such as race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. And again, the EEOC simply defines discrimination as treating a person differently or less favorably for some reason. And so here is just a snapshot of the types of discrimination claims that are being filed with the EEOC and the percentages. Next slide, please. Discrimination is alive and well within the manufacturing industry as well as other industries. But you know, those that identify with women actually tend to be targeted more than others. And during the research, the specific issues that pertain to women and discrimination are related to career path, pay equity, gender identity, pregnancy, and social events. Next slide, please. As many of you can attest, women are seldom seen, relatively speaking, in the top level boxes of, on the organizational chart. They lag behind the proportion of women in leadership roles at other types of companies. So there's fewer women in leadership positions in manufacturing than other types of companies in different industries. The manufacturing industry essentially has a gendered career path, which means that men are expected to fill engineering, management, and VP roles, while women are often relegated to quality control, accounting, and HR roles. Researchers Herminia Ibarra, Robin Ely, and Deborah Kolb call this second-generation bias. And they wrote an article called Women Rising, The Unseen Barriers. And they note that research has moved away from the focus of deliberate exclusion to women towards investigating second-generation forms of gender bias as a primary cause of women's persistent underrepresentation in leadership roles. So the bias is powerful but subtle, and it often creates invisible barriers for women that arise from cultural assumptions and organizational structures, practices, and patterns of interaction that inadvertently benefit men while putting women at a disadvantage. Next slide, please. So Ely, Kolb's, and Ibarra's research, the 2013 research was actually confirmed in a 2015 study done by Deloitte. And this research was done in partnership with the Manufacturing Institute, as well as the APICS Supply Chain Council. And so the question asked of the study respondents was, do you believe the standards of performance are the same for men and women in the industry? And if not, whose standard do you think is higher? And 2/3 of the respondent indicates that standards for performance are not the same for men and women. And they also said that for the standards are not the same, more than 3/4 say that the standards are definitely higher for women. Next slide, please. And so in preparation for this presentation, I actually interviewed a few women who are in manufacturing. And, I wanted to keep it anonymous, and I'm not going to disclose which organizations that they work for. But I just wanted to capture some of the themes that came up during the interviews. And so the top 3 themes are, male colleagues questioning someone's marital or parental status because they don't understand, don't believe, or don't support the idea that a woman can be committed to both their career and caring for the family. Another comment that came up was, I find myself walking a tightrope because between being seen as too feminine to be competent and too masculine to be likable. And the last comment is, I heard about a young engineer doing amazing work at a competitor organization. So I asked HR to recruit him. I was unable to participate in the interview, but when we finally met during a team meeting, he asked me who I was and had a disgusted look on his face when I told him I'm the manager he will report to. The person was ticked off because She is very educated. She's a qualified manager that happens to be a Black woman. And she recommended him. And so the disgusted look that he gave her, she said was akin to a slap in the face. So I'm going to pause there. Jalen, are there any comments in the chat?
I don't see any questions right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next slide, please. According to the Office for National Statistics, women in the trades, construction, and manufacturing are paid on average 14% less than men who do the same job. The gap rises up to 22% further up the career chain for women in senior or supervisor roles. Next slide, please. So again, extracting from that same Deloitte study, more than 70% of study respondents indicate that their experience causes them to believe that there is a pay gap between men and women in the manufacturing industry. What's more, survey respondents who believe that there is a pay gap unanimously agreed 100% that wages are higher for men. So while the industry pays higher than average salaries, men still benefit disproportionately. Research also indicates that gender wage gaps exist in a number of manufacturing-related roles, including first-line supervisors of production and operating workers, production planning and expediting clerks, and also production workers. So there's a 73% wage gap between production workers and those in hiring positions. So men tend to make more money in all of those positions than women. So although these categories just represent a very small fraction of the types of roles in modern manufacturing, they're relevant. The relevant indicators of the pay disparity between men and women in the industry. So when I asked the interviewees about pay equity, all of them said that pay is both a top reason to stay and a top reason to go. And the reason being is that the industry pays higher than average salaries. So according to the National Association of Manufacturers, as of 2013, the average manufacturing worker in the United States earns over $77,000 a year, whereas the average worker in other industries make approximately $62,500. Next slide, please. Oops, one more slide, sorry. Okay, so gender identity is another huge issue of discrimination. And gender identity correlates with assigned sex at birth, or it can differ from it. It's the personal conception of oneself as male or female, or neither, both or neither. And so members of the LBG community often face hostility in the workplace. There was a study conducted by Harvard University School of Public Health in 2017 that found that 20% of LGBTQ Americans have experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. This is when they're applying for jobs. And then once they get the jobs, members of the LGBTQ community, particularly people of color, are 32% more likely to experience workplace discrimination than white members of the LGBTQ community. And research shows that 22% of LGBTQ Americans are not receiving the same pay as others. So there's a huge gap disparity, not only between men and women, but also members of the LGBTQ community who are paid on average 22% less. Next slide, please. Members of the transgender community are especially vulnerable to discrimination. Offensive jokes based on sexual orientation or gender identity are a form of harassment. And according to a 2018 report by the Human Rights Campaign, over half of the LGBTQ communities or employees that responded to the survey reported hearing lesbian or gay jokes at work, and 37% heard bisexual jokes, and 41% heard transgender jokes. 10% of those employees have left their job due to feeling alienated, vilified, and isolated on the workplace. And a quarter of those individuals stayed on the job, but transitioned. So they stayed on the job, but just transferred to another department. Next slide, please. So when I interviewed the women, or the people who identify as females, I asked a question about identity, specifically gender identity. And their comment was that identity is very tribal. You see white folks protecting other white folks and Black folks protecting other Black folks, but it's rare to see protection across color lines. Next slide, please. So pregnancy and motherhood is it's another issue of discrimination. You know, pregnant women work in hazardous jobs in many industries, not just manufacturing. But you know, pregnant women face unique risk and may be more susceptible to workplace hazards. Unfortunately, that means that a lot of employers are being reactive and involuntarily moving pregnant women from positions or duties without the employee's request or agreement. And there are federal and state laws that protect pregnant women in the workplace and actually prohibit employers from requiring employees to take accommodations to which they do not agree. So accommodations would be a forced reassignment or relinquishing specific job duties. Next slide, please. Women report pregnancy discrimination across races and ethnicities, but I found it interesting that Black women are disproportionately affected. So nearly 3 in 10 charges of pregnancy discrimination were filed by Black women. So that is 28.6% were actually filed by Black women. And as you can see here on the slide, the percent of charges brought against the manufacturing industry was 7.6%. So think about that. Overall, it's 7.6%, but the discrimination rate of Black women in the industry is 28.6%. Next slide, please, and then we'll take some questions. This was very interesting for me when I interviewed the women. One specifically mentioned that she's an African-American woman, and she mentioned that her white female colleague and her were pregnant at the same time. And a new white employee, one who presents and identifies as male, asked the Black woman how far along she was. Actually asked the white woman how far along she was. And then she turned to the Black woman and asked, "Oh, you're pregnant too. How many kids do you have, and do they have the same father?" And I think the thing so that was very shocking in and of itself, but also to have the female colleague who's also pregnant, who, from what I was told, promotes herself as an ally, did not say a single word. So I'm going to pause there. Are there questions, Jalen?
Yeah, so there's a question from Mark. Are there any specific resources that companies can use around gender identity?
What do you mean specific resources? Tell me a little bit more about that. To support those, or to just inform the other employees?
Mark said to understand and recruit.
Well, as far as I know, and this is it's different for every state, but you need to look at your state's employment laws because it is illegal in certain states to even ask about gender or gender identity. So it should not even be a topic of discussion when you're recruiting or during the interview process. Again, that varies by state. I know here in Washington State, it's illegal. Any other questions?
None right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next slide, please. So another issue regarding discrimination is social events. And 8 out of every 10 women who completed a survey, it was an Ernst and Young survey, said that they felt excluded from male-oriented conversations and social events. And so Ernst and Young conducted a belonging barometer survey, and they polled more than 1,000 employees, American employees, and asked them to define belonging and what makes them feel like they have a sense of belonging at work and what causes them to feel isolated. So 8 out of every 10 women surveyed said that they felt left out and excluded from conversations, and 61% of the women surveyed believe that being excluded from social events is a form of bullying. And I found that to be quite interesting that they would equate exclusion as bullying. Next slide, please. And so when I asked the survey, the interview participants about this, they said men can't talk to us women the same way that they talk to men, so they don't talk to us at all, right? Very isolating to be in a male-dominated field and not have your male colleague speak to you. Another person said that I can tell when my male colleagues have been bad-mouthing me specifically or saying something inappropriate about women in general because they always shut up when I enter the room and look like a cat trying to swallow a rotten bird. Right? So not just try to swallow the canary, but a rotten bird. Next slide, please. So research from 2018, this was a leanin.org and McKinsey and Company study of more than 64,000 employees at 279 companies. And they found that those who identify as female are more likely to face everyday discrimination or microaggressions, like being subjected to demeaning comments, having to provide more evidence of their competence, of being mistaken for someone who's much more junior. So, maybe a senior person is being mistaken as an entry-level employee. And 64% of women mentioned that there are a lot of comments and microaggressive comments regarding their femininity, a lot of lesbian jokes, because, again, this is a male-dominated industry. And so a lot of people assume that because we are women in a field that we must be lesbian. And so women reported that in this study. And the study also shows that 35% of women have experienced sexual harassment at some point in their career. There's also data that says that only 27% of the employees say that their managers regularly challenged microaggressive behavior and micro inequities at work. So they see it or they hear it, but only 27% of managers respond to it and shut it down. So what does this mean? It means that bystander intervention actually needs to happen more frequently. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off with the definition of bystander intervention. And so the top definition is actually the definition that the University of Texas and Lehigh University put forth that's commonly used. And that definition is bystander intervention is recognizing a potentially harmful situation or interaction and choosing to respond in a way that could positively influence the outcome. In other words, it's choosing to take action when you see a behavior that puts others at risk of mental, emotional, and/or physical distress. Next slide, please. And so when I do bystander intervention training, I actually adapted a situational model that was created in 1970 by Latane and Darley. And of course, this was developed over 50 years ago. But out of all of the models that I looked at, I really preferred this model because the first step is, as bystanders, we need to observe and notice the event. We need to notice where it is, what's happening, what's the context, all those things. Who's involved, who's ignoring the situation. We need to have a broad observational lens, and then decide the best way to help and finally to intervene. So simply being with others may facilitate or actually inhibit whether we get involved. So by that, it means that if our friends are in the situation or they're observing with us, and if our friends fail to act, then we tend to not act either. And so that is called the diffusion of responsibility. So if they don't act, we don't act. And if we're alone, we should have personal responsibility to help, but sometimes we don't because we feel uncomfortable. Again, I am encouraging you all to speak up and speak out if you see something wrong. And so the way we do that, we act for altruistic reasons. Sometimes it's self-altruism, sometimes our egos are involved. Either way, we really need to think about resolving the situation so no harm is done. So, Rachel, is the video going to play?
Hi, Kimberly. Good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Rachel, also, some of you can hear the video, some of you can't. Okay, all right. So we're going to move forward, and yes, I intentionally made the video to be very microaggressive. It was intentional. I hope I didn't offend anyone, but that was done intentionally because I wanted to see who on this graphic, on this animation, who would you say should take responsibility for intervention? I mean, everyone there observed the situation. Is there a particular person that you believe should have intervened? Okay, Laura says everyone in the room. Okay. So many of you say everyone. Okay. So what action should be taken? If you were in the room, how would you address the situation? Oh, okay. Okay, so Pamela, do you mind unmuting yourself or just typing in the chat? Why do you think the white male should speak up? Unfortunately, may have a stronger voice. Okay, why are you generalizing and making assumptions? Who's generalizing and making assumptions? Yes, anyone can point out racial bias, absolutely. But the reason why I asked that question is because, again, we tend to put ourselves in this situation where if our friends aren't speaking up, then we don't speak up either, right? So yes, anyone can speak up, but how many people really do it, right? That's the whole issue. And so the next question is, with whom, so how would you follow up? How would you respond to this? How would you act? Would you call in or call out? Okay, immediately say that's inappropriate. Okay. Okay, thank you for commenting. And call in. Okay, thank you, Erica. I'm a fan of immediate, but prefer private. Okay. Oh, thank you, Melinda. Okay, next slide, please. So someone mentioned that they would call out, and a few people actually mentioned that you would call out. And there are ways of calling out. And so one way of doing that would just say, I need you to stop right there. Or that comment or word is really offensive. I need you to be mindful of your audience. Choose a different word. Or you could say, I'm having a really strong reaction to that, and I need you to know why. Or I feel really obligated as your peer, as your friend, or even as your supervisor to tell you that that is not okay. Next slide, please. And so let me just back up for a minute, and you don't need to change slides. But when you call out, the best time to call out is when someone is in imminent harm. By that, it means physical, mental, or emotional danger. So if you see that someone is immediately being targeted and harmed, that's when you would call out. If you are unsure about it, or it doesn't appear that the person is reacting in a way that indicates that they're in danger or that they are feeling anxiety or stress about it, then you can call in. And so some examples of calling in would be, hey, I'm really curious what your intention was when you said that. How might someone else see it differently? And what is making you nervous, fearful, uncomfortable, or worried that you would even say such things? So these are just some examples of calling in. Again, there are many, many ways of calling out or calling in. But again, you want to make sure that you maintain not only your own respect and dignity, but you want to make sure that everyone in the room feels the same way, right? You don't want to make a bad situation worse, right? So when people yell, what good is it for you to yell, right? When I'm in a situation where someone is yelling or being belligerent and things like that, I tend to lower my voice and I kind of whisper. I'm like, what? Right? So I throw them off of their defense, right? If someone's yelling and you change your tone of voice and you start speaking more softly, they're going to like calm down. They're like, what? I don't understand what you're saying. Why are you speaking so softly? It's going to take them a minute to process and they're automatically going to calm down, right? So you're helping to diffuse the situation. The old saying, fighting fire with fire, both people are going to be injured. So what good is that, right? You both want to, leave the situation relatively unscathed. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is part 2 of that video. And I hope all of you can hear it this time. Okay, next slide, please. So I want you all to consider, what will you and the manufacturing industry lose if you continue to allow birds to be hurt by the slingshot? And what will you and the manufacturing industry gain if you put away or take away the slingshot? Consider how your organization's culture will shift if you regularly challenge biased language and behavior. Next slide, please. It is your responsibility, all of our responsibilities, to not engage in performative allyship, but to be an advocate and an accomplice to create a supportive culture that cares for people, drives real engagement, and ultimately sees business results. Last slide, please. So are there any questions? We have a few minutes that I can help answer, or you can open. Go ahead.
So I want to expand on Mark's previous question about resources. So they were specifically asking for education and understanding resources that can help people overcome their biases.
Okay, so I would say, I wouldn't necessarily put it in the framework of gender bias. I would just say bias in general, because first of all, we need to get in touch with our bias. We need to acknowledge that we have them. You know, a lot of times when I say bias, people automatically say, I'm not racist. And it's like, I never said you were racist. I said we have bias, right? Two different things. But I think that's number one. The fact that you're actually asking that question is very, very good, Mark, because a lot of people don't have the courage to even acknowledge that they have bias. So first, what I would encourage you to do is just kind of sit back and reflect on what bias do you have, and think about how they came to be to begin with, right? And so one example that I like to give is my own personal bias that I had to overcome, which was being biased against people in Chevy pickup trucks. And I'm like, why am I having such a strong reaction to this? And I had to think back to my childhood that I almost got ran over by a person who was driving a rusted out Chevy pickup truck. And so every time I saw one after that, I kind of tensed up. So that was my own bias. So think about what you're biased about, and think about why you have them, and then work to reduce them. There's a lot of research that says we can actually change our mindset, and it just takes a little bit of work and effort. And so I would say to think about what you're thinking about when you having a biased opinion. Ask yourself, why are you having this biased opinion?
So we have another question that is asking for the links to the videos that you shared, since some people couldn't hear.
I will ask my assistant to put them up on YouTube, and I will send you the link, Rachel.
And then someone said, you said to call out if there is immediate harm, but is it okay to call out in other circumstances?
Again, it's situational and you know what's at play. So what I tell people all the time is, if you see someone being harmed, you need to pick up on their nonverbal cues. So if you see someone on the verge of tears or, you know, visibly upset, then yes, I will call that out because that person is experiencing trauma. But if a person is not reacting or not showing any kind of reaction, you know, non-verbally, then I would go to that person after the fact and say, you know what, can I help you with this? How can I support you in this? Do you want me to walk beside you? Do you want me to walk in front of you? Or do you want me to walk behind you? So that means, do you want me to go with you to this person and confront them? Do you want me to go ahead of you and confront them on your behalf? Or do you want to go and confront them yourself and have me kind of be like the validating backup source? So there's different ways it's situational, right? You don't want to put yourself in a situation that's going to cause an explosive situation where there does not need to be an explosive situation.
I don't see any other questions currently.
Okay. Yes. To answer your question, Amber, yes, that's why it has not been posted on Facebook, or not Facebook, YouTube, because my team always does the closed captioning. So it takes a little time.
Okay, we have another question. If coworkers ask you why you aren't smiling or in a good mood, is that considered a microaggression?
Yes. Because you have to ask yourself, why are you asking them that? And why do you assume that they should be smiling? Any other questions? Sorry, Jalen. Jalen's like frantically going through the chat, making sure that she hasn't missed any questions.
I think we're good unless anybody has final questions that they want to send now.
Last call for questions. We have 2 minutes left. Thank you, Dee. Thank you, Jamila. If any of you have any questions, my contact info is on the slide. Feel free to screenshot it, and I believe Rachel's also going to send that out. We will post the YouTube video. Well, we will post the video on YouTube after we do the closed captioning, and I will send Rachel that link to send out to you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimberly Harden.
Thank you, Leticia.
You're welcome for your presentation. Next up, we are pleased to introduce from the U.S. Department of Labor, Natalie Linton, and then after her, we will close out with Lark Jackson on her presentation on supporting tradeswomen's success and being an ally. So I'd like to turn it over now to Natalie Linton. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Kimberly. That was a really great segment and tough act to follow. You've given us a lot to think about, and I know that I'll be taking a lot of this information back to my team. And I want to thank everyone for a wonderful discussion today of the daily issues faced in gaining employment and keeping employment. We all know the reality. While apprenticeship numbers continue to increase, women and minorities are still a small portion of the population. So I want to begin by reviewing some of the data, the trend data that we've pulled, and John Ladd made mention of these earlier today, but I just wanted to give you, a quick visual of this. So I do believe I have 2 slides there. There we go. Thank you. So what we see here is based on our demographic information from 2015 to 2019. And we see here very slow increases in the number of Hispanic and Latino apprentices. It's 5% and it's 3% for active Latinx. For Black and African American apprentices, slightly and clearly represents an opportunity for growth here. If we look at then the new apprentices, clearly we're looking again small changes, but not significant. So clearly there's still a long way for us to go. So equal opportunity is not new to the Department of Labor's registered apprenticeship system. The registered apprenticeship system has always incorporated some general equity ideals, but in 2017, the regulations, which we all sort of know commonly as the final rule, were updated to create very specific guidelines and identify actions to ensure non-discriminatory practices in recruitment and selection, as well as creating harassment-free environments, which are two factors that historically we know contribute to the low number of women and minorities either entering or completing occupations and apprenticeships. Typically, we all know that businesses view any federal regulations as a barrier to their growth and success, but I think that we can view the EEO rule through a lens of opportunity. I encourage industry and all of you who work with industry groups and sponsors to ask two questions. First, how can we use the regulations to support our goals? And second, how can we use the regulations to help us take meaningful steps or actions to attract and recruit more women and people of color? Among other things, the regulations require that registered apprenticeship program sponsors ensure that their outreach to and recruitment of apprentices extend to all persons available for apprenticeship within their relevant recruitment area, without regard to race, sex, ethnicity, or disability. And I think that's a really salient point here based on, our conversations these last 2 days. Specifically, the registered apprenticeship sponsors are required to do three things. First, they must develop and annually update a list of their recruitment sources so that it generates referrals from all demographic groups within their relevant recruitment area. Second, they must confirm each recruitment source. So it's not enough to simply say, my friend, referred. We need a more robust, organization or some specifics along that it's really tied to a larger initiative. And finally, sponsors must provide recruitment sources with advance notice, preferably 30 days before the application deadline for a position. So they must provide that recruitment source of any openings and give them time to identify and refer candidates. So with these three specific actions, I think that we can, push our work forward here in making sure that we are targeting not only those groups that work with, the groups that we want to identify, women, minorities, any other groups that we're looking at, but we also are asking them to take specific action. Another thing that registered apprenticeship sponsors must do is conduct what we call a workforce availability analysis, which is an assessment of the available workforce compared to the representation in their programs. And the benefit of this is that sponsors can actively work to improve their enrollment of any minority group by focusing their recruitment efforts to attract these groups. The goal, again, is to have the actual workforce match the available workforce. So if your available workforce around your area is 50%, then ideally 50% women who would match your recruitment measures, then you should try to have 50% in your program. So to help sponsors with this outreach and recruitment, OA has developed an online universal tool, which John Ladd mentioned earlier today. And if I can get the next slide up, please. And this is just a snapshot of what this looks like. And this is a wonderful tool. It's a resource, again, to help sponsors find diverse candidates for their apprenticeship program. The tool includes nonprofit, state, local, community organizations across the country that can help you to publicize your apprenticeship openings and also refer any potential candidates. So what you do with the tool is you put in, if you look at the top there, this is just a screenshot, you can put in the radius, how far do you want the tool to search from your area, your address, and 25 miles. So it will give you very specifics. And the great thing about this is that once the tool generates a list of organizations, you can pop it out and print it out in an Excel sheet or a Word sheet if you want. So you have all that data there. So it's pulling data from various places, local census or places, anything that has, any list of sponsors and organizations that work. So we're very excited about this. So one great thing for this, I think, is that, sponsors who may, for example, want to hire women or Hispanic, Asian women, very specific, can enter those specific parameters into the targeted outreach tool. And I think for sectors such as advanced manufacturing, it can be valuable as it not only identifies a new potential source of workers, but also provides a list of these community organizations that you can work with directly. So I would encourage everyone to go to our website and look at that. The website is listed there at the bottom. I also want to emphasize that while the regulations target and encourage recruitment of women and minorities, there is no quota attached. This tends to be something that we hear quite a bit of pushback from organizations and sponsors. That they think there's a quota. There is no quota. Again, these are goals. How you set your goals can be as simple as I heard someone say today, making a decision that you will do something, but you also have to have a date. When are you going to do this? What does that look like in terms of a numeric target? But again, no quota. The regulations do not say that you need to hire someone who's unqualified just based on race and gender or other targeted reasons. So I've heard quite a lot of really wonderful examples of how organizations are working to bring greater diversity to advanced manufacturing. And OA has created, the Office of Apprenticeship has created a website dedicated directly and entirely to EEO. As well, we've developed a robust suite of tools, fact sheets, and other information that anyone can download and use as they work with sponsors. One of the videos that we have there that you can download is anti-harassment training, which is required by the regulations. We've already created it. Simply download it, use it, and you're all set. Because, again, these are the areas where we find that sponsors are saying, I don't know how to do X. I don't know how to meet the requirements. We've done the work for you. And again, you're all doing wonderful work on your end to help the sponsors to meet them, these requirements. So do feel free to utilize any of the resources that we have and let us know how we can further assist you if you need additional resources. We're always open to hearing from folks in the industry, in the field, about what's needed. The website information is apprenticeship.gov, so apprenticeship.gov. And under the diversity and inclusion page, you will be directed to the EEO website. Ultimately, I believe that we can look to EEO in apprenticeship regulations and the resource that we've developed at OA and the partners such as CWIT and JFF to support our collective efforts to increase female representation in trades. As I wrap up, I do want to make a quick note on the regulations and how it may potentially benefit women and minorities. There's a place in the regulations that permits direct entry selection procedures where sponsors may allow direct entry into their programs, that is, entry without going through the usual selection procedures, for any candidates from specified training programs or who can demonstrate certain qualifications. I think this is a great opportunity for us to think about how to recruit women, particularly from the military. If we think about this as a talent pool, many of the skills that are acquired during military service transfers really well to manufacturing and other industries. And as well, this talent pool, they're likely to be able to earn advanced credit. So I think that's one area that you can really look at the regulations in general to see how it supports the work that you're doing. Thank you all for joining us. I think that this has been really great. Again, please feel free to reach out to me, Natalie Linton, and I think Hewitt has my contact information there. Yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw that into the chat. And thank you all for inviting us here. Now, I'm not very good at talking and reading, so I'm going to have to ask Lark or someone else to tell me what's going on in the chat. If someone can read that out for me, I'm happy to answer.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Natalie, just for your work in ensuring that we have those tools necessary to implement equity in apprenticeship. So I'll just send it over to the audience for just a few minutes, about 3 minutes or so. If anyone has questions for Natalie Linton, please type them in the chat box right now.
I see one really wonderful piece here from Leah Hamilton. Sorry, Leah, that was supposed to be private. I just realized that.
Okay.
But I actually think, yes, any suggestions that folks have about how we can improve our work and helping you, please do reach out to me. Please, Lark, if you can maybe put my contact information up somewhere, or can someone
Absolutely.
do that? Yes.
Okay. So, Natalie, I have another one for you. What's the definition of available workforce?
Great one. All right. So the available workforce are those individuals who meet your workforce criteria that are in your area. So again, this universal outreach tool allows you to put in your criteria, education level, skill level. You put in all that you want, and it pops out. These are all the people in your area who fit this based on the census or other local workforce data that we're pulling.
And finally, we'll take 1 more minute for questions. If anyone has one more question for Natalie. Okay.
I know no one wants to talk to the Fed. It's okay. we're the bad guys, the rule makers. But again, I see this as an opportunity. What can be done if there's a rap they're not accepting women? Great question. That's something that is a tricky one to answer. On the one hand, I want to be careful how I answer this. I think that there are 2 levels of issues here as I see this. Number one is in the application, is there a specific limit, right? A statement that women are not being considered. I think we've all seen where we said, no, you must open this up to all. That is different from accepting candidates. If there is a real reason that someone is not being accepted, a real legitimate reason that someone's not being accepted, then I think that that is up to the sponsor. The last piece I'll address there is if you have someone who comes to you and they're concerned that they were not accepted because of status, then that person has the right to file an EEO complaint, not just for the application process, but also they have the right to file an EEO complaint when they're in the apprenticeship. So at all stages, candidates must feel as if they have an equal opportunity. Can you provide a link to the resource finder tool? Everything start at apprenticeship.gov.
Great. Okay. And again, we will send out supporting materials and resources next week. So thank you, Natalie, again. We appreciate you so much. And I'm really excited that we now have this tool set for to implement our programs. So my name is Lark Jackson, and I am the program manager at CWIT's National Center for Women's Equity in Apprenticeship and Employment. Over the course of these past 2 days, we've learned from the experience and the expertise of our amazing panelists and presenters about how to build equity and inclusion into our programs at every level to ensure that women have fair access to careers in skilled manufacturing. We've learned about the immense value that women add to skilled manufacturing, the collective strategies that industry stakeholders can take to recruit and retain women, and also the systemic challenges such as implicit bias in hiring practices and microaggressions that affect women, particularly women of color, that we must first acknowledge and then unpack to be successful in recruiting and retaining more women in this industry. However, what I've learned, and I hope that you can all agree, is that the possibilities are endless for what we can do to create a more dynamic workforce and skilled manufacturing. Women like Leah Rambo, Denise Dixon, Natasha Francis, Melinda De Jesus, Carla Trotman, and Constance Thomas are all examples of what can happen when you invest not only in recruitment, but also the leadership development and skilled manufacturing. An importance of this work is being an ally. This term is now within our common lexicon as we continue to have national conversations about racial justice, pay equity, and other movements that seek to address inequity within our society. Being an ally is more than just a title. It's a verb and should be a daily practice, an exercise almost in affirming your commitment to identifying disparity and taking small and large steps to correct it. To support women in skilled manufacturing, being an ally means being intentional about gender inclusivity, neutrality, and sensitivity, assessing your own biases, practices, and cultural competency, examining assumptions about dominant culture that just might not be true for women, challenging gender terms and language in our industry that can marginalize women, and understanding intersectionality among women, such as race and gender, so that instead of being erased, women are celebrated for the identities that inform the unique perspectives that they bring to their work. An ally is someone who actively listens, is engaged in constant learning, and reflects on how someone's identity confers privilege or subjects them to exclusion, with the aim to prevent the latter. Furthermore, being an ally means really understanding the roots of inequality in this industry, such as a lack of outreach and career education for women, persistent stereotypes in sex-segregated voc ed programs, limited training and career advancement for women when they do enter this industry, and the detrimental impact of micro inequities over time when molehills become mountains for women. We know the benefits that women bring to this industry: diversity of skill sets, transferable skills, and experience and aptitude in the workforce. Now it's up to us to be more intentional about how to market our industry to this dynamic pool of candidates. And while much of the discussions have centered around how our institutions can work to create more equity for women in skilled manufacturing, these institutional changes can only work if we hold ourselves accountable as individuals, intervening when we witness poor behavior, as Kimberly Harden highlighted. I want to thank each and every one of our presenters, panelists, and the JFF, West Virginia Women Work, and Chicago Women in Trades organizing team for creating a space where we can learn, we can share resources, and we can push forward in spite of the challenges we face at this time. I also want to thank you, the attendees, for showing up. But now it's time to do that work. Thank you. We will send out follow-up materials next week, and please stay connected with us. Be safe, be well, and press forward in your commitment to supporting prospective and current tradeswomen. Thank you all.